So just a short announcement before we get into today's episode. Some of you have asked how you could support the show, which we really appreciate. So we've now set up a Patreon page. And Patreon is an easy way for people to donate money to, in this case, our podcast. And if you become a Patreon supporter, of course, you're contributing to making the podcast possible. And you'll get access to bonus material like extended episodes, and of course receive our undying gratitude. So visit patreon.com/forestofthought for more information on that. Welcome to the Forest of Thought with me, Ingrid Rieser. So we've returned from our summer vacation with more conversational adventures, and I spent some of the summer holidays thinking about how to move into the second half of our first season, and that season is called Landmarks, because we've been exploring some of the foundational ideas that we live by, and looking at how we might find new perspectives on some of the familiar ideas that help shape our world. So I was thinking about this for a good long while, but then I got to this point where there was this question that was really bothering me. And that was the following: what is an idea? What does the word idea even mean? And I thought that a word that is so central to the podcast is probably worth exploring in more detail. So, in this episode, we're on an adventure with historian of ideas, Per Johansson, to see if we can start to understand what an idea, and by extension what the forest of thought, really is.
I'm not exaggerating at all if I say that everything that any human being has ever produced, however insignificant, however small, however large, everything that any human has ever produced in a material sense, which exists as something that you can touch, all of that are ideas, manifested, materialized ideas. And once an idea exists in material form, it's not so easy to escape.
Per Johansson is a human ecologist, historian of ideas, and, to my mind, uncategorizable thinker. In Sweden, he is known for a podcast series that he has made together with journalist Eric Schüldt on diverse topics such as humans' relationship to technology and existential questions like the mystery of what the world is and what it means to be human. Because Pad has studied everything from evolutionary biology to history and ancient Bible texts, I find he's particularly good at bridging diverse topics in insightful ways. So an excellent companion in the forest of thought. We had this following conversation on one of the last warm days of summer at his home in Stockholm. I think that I'm going to start by saying just a little bit about the podcast and how it came to be called The Forest of Thought. Mm-hmm. So the central image is this forest of thought that's populated by all of these different ideas and concepts. And it's sort of this magical and also a little bit intimidating place that we can explore. And the reason that I developed this image of the forest of thought was that I wanted it to kind of conjure up this sense of adventure. Mm-hmm. And it's this kind of sense of adventure that I can feel when I'm engaged in a really good conversation, or following a very interesting line of thought, or reading something that you feel like you're on the cusp of something really interesting, or even have this aha moment. And I feel like that moment is kind of like when you've been, bushwhacking through the forest and it's dark and there's lots of weeds and vines and bramble, and then you kind of stumble into this glade, this beautiful glade, filled with sunlight, and you're like, this is the place. And so there's something about there's a likeness between those two feelings. And my thought is that we could be a lot more adventurous in the ways that we're exploring the forest of thought, the way we engage with ideas. And we could maybe be a lot more fearless if we learn to navigate a bit better, because we have a tendency to stick to kind of our favorite paths, even when we try not to. You try, like, I'm going to go off and here and explore a little bit, and then before you know it, you're back on the same.
I'm going to go outside the box, but then you're still aware of the box.
Yes, right? exactly. So even when you're trying to kind of go beyond what you know, then you're back on your familiar path without even noticing it or without meaning to. So my hope with the podcast is, and also that we have a very kind of stilted or unfluid or serious way of trying to do this exploration, that it's very, it's not very playful or joyful somehow. So my hope with the podcast was that both for myself and for others, we can glimpse these other perspectives, but also, be in the forest in a different way. And another reason that I like the image of the forest is that it emphasizes the fact that ideas are also not separate, and it's an ecology of ideas, and it's always developing, and things are influencing each other, and they're connected in ways that we actually don't really understand. And so some of the ideas that we talked about on the podcast so far, like the economy as an idea, how did that develop as an idea? Progress, apocalypse as an idea, and also time. These are really, they're so big, they're more like complexes of ideas. And so you're a historian of ideas.
Yes, that's part of
it.
Yes.
And a human ecologist, among other things. But what that makes me think is that you have seen how the forest has developed over time. So you have a better idea than most of us of what's been going on there. And so, now I've started with this forest of thought metaphor as a starting point, which we can develop the metaphor, we can leave the metaphor at any time we want. But based on that description, I'm wondering if you want to start by saying something about what this creature that's called an idea that is populating this forest, what is that?
Well, let me stay first a while in the very image of the forest.
Yes, please.
Which I think is a very, very good image. If you're going to think, I won't say correctly, but more realistically about what ideas are and what ideas do and how ideas function. And because I actually think of the sum total of ideas within, let's say, the history of Western culture as very much like a forest that is very much like an ecosystem. And then, of course, you can think of ecosystems, also ecosystems of thoughts or ideas. You can think of that in different terms, or from different points of view. You can think about it like a systems ecologist, for instance. A systems ecologist stresses things like energy conversion and food webs and such like, and the how things connect and belong together, so to speak, on a macro level. And you could have the same perspective regarding ideas. There are sort of clusters of related ideas. You can follow, at least it feels like you could follow the history of such clusters of ideas almost linearly back in time, and get a sort of overview of how has the history of Western thought, and that's the usual way of writing the history of philosophy, for instance. And I would liken that in a way, not to, I wouldn't push the likeness too far, but in a way this to me is a bit like system psychology approach. I'm not criticizing system psychology, but I think what that kind of perspective on ecosystems is that it prevent if you get too stuck in that perspective, it prevents you from seeing all the multiplicity of interacting creatures and entities and various circumstances and microclimates and whatnot.
So you're too focused on the overall development of a cluster rather than the specificities going on.
Yeah, and you sort of can get the feeling that you understand things because you have this macroscopic view. You can get the subjective feeling that I understand this. I know how ecosystems work, and the corollary in the world of ideas would be, well, I know the history of Western philosophy. You could say things like, and it would be true in a way, but it would be also not tell you very much. You could say, well, it all starts with Socrates and Plato, and then either you can say, and then there was progress. People understood more and more, or you could say, and then it was all downhill from there, depending on your view of the development of civilization, or Western civilization at least. Anyway, in that way, I think you miss all the interesting things. In order to and you also get a completely wrong-headed view of how history works, I think. I wrote a PhD dissertation some years ago, which I gave the title "The Lure of Origins," and by that I meant that there is a kind of trap in a too great a fixation on origins.
Interesting.
Because how do you arrive at the very idea of origins of anything? You have this fascinating or disturbing or interesting phenomenon in the present, and you ask yourself, how did that come about? What happened? How could it be that in the world of ideas then, how could it be then that we think like this now? Where did the idea of a progress come from?
Right.
And then there must be an origin to this idea, or it could be something very actual and concrete. It could be like what I focused upon in the dissertation. I focused upon the origin of agriculture in Sweden. And so, how did agriculture start in our part of the world? What's the origin? And then you have this concept of either progress or agriculture, and you think you know what it means, and then you sort of track it back through history, and you arrive at the originary point where it all started. And how can you do that? The question I put to myself was, okay, you can identify something that to us seems to have been agriculture about 6,000 years ago in Sweden. Or you could identify what seems to have been an idea of progress in, sometime in the 14th century, maybe. The question is what you then call agriculture or the idea of progress, is it actually what you today mean by agriculture or progress? And if you go into the details, and here is where the details matter, and why the systems ecology or the general sort of linear history of philosophy approach doesn't work, is that if you go into the details, you find that well, they didn't seem to do agriculture in a way that actually looks like what we today call agriculture at all, or what, like for example, a guy called Joachim, we would say in Swedish. I forgot right now what the English word would be. Joachim of Fiore in the 14th century, if I'm not misremembering at the moment, in the Middle Ages anyway. He came up with an idea that seems a sort of historical progression, which is often touted as the origin, one of the origins at least, or an origin to the idea of progress. But my point is that if it is the case, which I say it is, that if you go into the detail, when you arrive at what you thought was the origin of something, present, in the present, when you arrive at the supposed point of origin, historically, and study that context in detail, you find that it's the whole idea sort of evaporates. So what does that mean? Where is the progression? Where is the linear development? Maybe there isn't any.
Right. At
all. Maybe it's all a retrospective construction.
Interesting.
And that's actually the conclusion I arrived at. And that's one reason I think that the image of the forest of thought is a very good one. Because a forest, a living forest, which has existed for a long time, it doesn't follow any linear progression at all. You have all kinds of creatures of all sizes, of all kinds of behaviors, all kinds of ecological niches. You have activities going on at very different times of day, different times of night, and so on and so forth. There's this extreme multiplicity. And you have that actually also in the history of ideas. Because that's one thing that you discover when you leave the textbooks and the summary histories and start to delve into an era or a period in more detail. How, let's say, 18th century France during the so-called Enlightenment. Who are the people or who are the thinkers which you come to think of in that context?
Oh no, don't do a history quiz on me now.
I didn't mean to. I will say it myself. You come to think about Voltaire,
right?
Rousseau, and so on and so forth.
I knew that.
Yeah, of course you did. Of course you did. Everyone knows that, and you learn that in school.
Yeah.
And even at university level, if you read about the history of thought during the Enlightenment, we will read of those great minds who in retrospect, have been identified as the originators of what we call the Enlightenment.
Yes.
But if you go into, really delve into that period, you will find hundreds, thousands of writers. Who many of them didn't write, most of them didn't write about what we deem significant at all. It wasn't, at that time, it wasn't in any way apparent that something which we called the Enlightenment was going on and was going to change everything. So there was a forest of thought.
Yes.
And it turned out in the long run, some trees grew.
Yeah.
more than the others and sort of created a sort of panoply which covered everything else.
Yeah.
But much later.
Yeah.
So the question of I think we are really confused in these matters. We don't really understand how things come about. Not even actual existing concrete things. Even less ideas.
Yeah, it makes me, well, it brings up a lot of thoughts, but one thing that I was just reading about was the French philosopher Gilles Deleuze, and he has this, just to continue on the ecological metaphor, he is saying how in our thinking around philosophy, for example, we're very focused on the idea of the tree as an image of how things develop. So you have the central trunk, and so that would be what we would, in the case of Western philosophy, that's Socrates and Plato, and then it kind of branches out and so on. But you have exactly what you were saying, the origins, and then he poses as an alternative to this a rhizomatic way of thinking, and a rhizome, as I understand it, is a kind of root structure where it's not like there's a trunk that's kind of the central and the oldest part. Like, things can grow out of all kinds of ways and unexpected ways, and there are connections between different parts of it, and so it's very non-linear. And I guess the question also becomes, because I think that one of the reasons that we engage in this kind of retrospective, creating a story out of the things that have happened, is that, we want to make sense of the world and what's going on, and we want to understand why are we here? Why do we have these ideas? And especially, why do we have all of these very unhelpful ideas, maybe, that are not so useful to us right now? And so how do we then start to approach that? What methods are at hand for us if we are not doing this retrospective story creation? That's
good question. Well, to be clear, I'm not saying that the retrospective kind of history writing is always not useful.
Yeah, of course.
It can be useful.
Yeah.
Because it makes you focus on similarities, which is a good thing to be able to do, to recognize, if not the same idea, but similar ideas. But what you find, as I said a minute ago, what you find when you go further back is that what is very clear as the dominating, let's say, a dominating idea today, as you follow its likeness back through history, you can in some sense see the likeness. And I'm not criticizing that. But you find that when you get to the point where you could start to think in terms of, well, now I have found the origin of this idea.
I see.
If you then, as I said, study in detail the context, then you will find that it was often it was a quite insignificant plant in the forest.
Right.
It wasn't at all the
and maybe a very different
all
shape.
These big trees that you see today.
Yeah, and maybe of a very different shape and character, and then what we now have come to connect with it.
And not only that, not only was it relatively insignificant, it was also, it didn't mean the same thing in that context, because what it means to us didn't exist. Yeah. And I think that thought is easier to understand if you think about technical inventions.
Right.
Take a cell phone, a mobile phone, and sort of teleport it into the Middle Ages. And what would it mean in the Middle Ages?
Yeah.
it would be this strange. As long as the battery lasts, you could show people some things on it. They would be amazed and think, what kind of devil's magical trick is this?
Yeah.
But they wouldn't be able to understand it at all.
No.
What it is to us.
Yeah.
And the same goes for ideas.
Yeah, and maybe that's also because the other very interesting aspect of this is how the kind of ideas that that are kind of thriving in our time, or that are given attention in our time, also then will affect how our what our world looks like, what the material reality is actually like, how we build our artificial environments and so on. Yeah. And I mean, for example, in our society at the moment, efficiency is an idea that has quite a strong hold. And I don't know if they had the same idea of efficiency in the Middle Ages. It probably looked sort of different.
No, they definitely did not.
No.
and efficiency is a rather interesting example, because it's the kind of concept which is impossible to understand without the artificial conditions within which it is meaningful.
Interesting. What do you mean by that?
Industrial production,
right?
More or less. Unless you have a society that is economically dependent on industrial production in some sense, the very concept of efficiency has no meaning.
So you'd say the early agriculturalists weren't interested.
I guess, although I haven't done any closer historical work on that concept, I can imagine, this is speculation, but I can imagine that you have a concept like whether something is efficacious or not. That is, if it does its work.
Right. If it's well suited to its task.
Yeah. But the concept of efficiency as it is to us, an abstract concept of getting things done in the most with minimum cost at maximum speed. That kind of concept has no meaning outside our kind of economy.
Right. Yeah, and it has such a big...
So this also points to the fact that ideas are never just ideas. They also exist within a material context. Yes.
Right, because there's a reciprocal relationship there, right? So our idea of efficiency kind of leads to certain kind of environments. So, for example, buildings built as cheaply as possible, or maybe train lines that will go as fast as possible, and countless other things. But then at the same time, that idea has evolved, like you said, because, or in tandem with in our industrial economy. So could you say something about that, of how is it that because somehow, if I have an idea, it is crazy to think that everything that we see around us, like this room that we're sitting in, and this lamp on the table, and these microphones, that they were all, at some point, somebody had an idea, I'm going to make this thing. Yeah. And then they manifest that in the world. And then once that is done, then it's going to affect, based on how this room is built, it's going to affect all the thoughts that I have. Like if somebody decided to build a prison instead of a greenhouse, the thoughts that you're going to have in the prison cell are going to be so different than the thoughts you have in a greenhouse. So, and now that we're spending so much of our time in artificial environments, how is that then affecting the ideas that we are developing?
Enormously.
Yeah.
It's I'm not exaggerating at all if I say that everything that any human being has ever produced however insignificant, however small, however large, however significant, however dominating, however forgotten, everything that any human has ever produced in a material sense, which exists as something that you can touch, everything is an idea. All of that are ideas, manifested, materialized ideas.
Yeah.
So, and once an idea exists in material form, it's not so easy to escape.
Right. Yeah.
Once you have all these cities with all these houses and all these telecommunications and all this electricity and all this everything, you can't just think, well, I don't like this idea very much. I would like to think something different. Well, of course you can, in your mind's eye, you can think something different. You can think and dream whatever you want, or you am able to, but
that, even that is affected. Even that will be affected by the...
Yeah, certainly. But the thing is that, and that's the main reason why I think of the world of ideas as ecological. Because in any long-term ecological context, like a coral reef or a rainforest or something like that, or even a long-lasting boreal forest here in the north, you have established conditions. You have all these furs.
Yeah.
You can't get, if you're in north of Sweden and you have all these furs, you can't say to yourself, I would like to have a little more, well, beeches or something, or elms. You can't get it because they don't grow there. It can't grow there.
Yeah.
For all kinds of reasons. And even if you plant firs in the south of Sweden where they don't belong, in a sense, once you've planted an artificial sort of field of firs in the south of Sweden, you can't just get beeches there either.
Yeah.
So ecology is all about restrictions and limitations. Once something exists, you can't just shove it aside or ignore it. It is what it is. And it's exactly the same with our artificial world, which we have created. So this means to us as human beings that we are forced, whether we like it or not, to live with what we have done. Thought. Yeah. Originally thought, but
yeah, and then done. Yeah.
We have to take the consequences. I would like to go back one step and say something about history again, because it might help to sort of get to the other side of what I just said now. I think it's... I would actually go so far as to say that there is no history of things. There is no history of ideas. There is no history of... and this sounds crazy, of course.
Especially since you're a historian of
ideas.
Yeah.
But what I mean is of course, a certain sense of history, a certain view of what history is, which I'm saying does not exist. And this is the view that says that things follow upon one another in an orderly, at least retrospectively, sort of obvious way. The corollary to this would be, so say, about the future. Since we know how it has been, we know how it will be. And we're very well aware of that isn't the case. You can't really predict the future. No one can. No one have ever been able to do that. It's not possible now either. It can't be done. Everyone who has ever tried has sort of gotten burnt about the absurdity of the predictions, sooner or later. So if that is the case regarding the future, why is it so hard for us to grasp that that must actually be the case in relation to the past as well? So every idea which says that everything progresses in a sort of an orderly fashion is, to my mind, wrong-headed, misguiding. Which lands me in the question, what is an idea? What do ideas do? What if it isn't history in this sense?
Right.
What is it that is going on? And I would say that it is a drama. And a constant, incessant confrontation between various different, I would even say, main kinds of ideas. And like all dramas, real dramas, not the scripted kind you watch on TV, like all real dramas, there is no given outcome. Every day is a new day. Every day is a new challenge in the drama. The roles shift. So what is an idea if you think about ideas in that sense? I some years ago I arrived at the... This isn't... sorry, but... when I first started to more seriously study the history of ideas, I asked myself that question: what the heck is an idea?
Yeah.
You have this subject called the history of ideas, and you have all these other kinds of academic subjects. You have zoology, and you can ask, what is zoology about? Well, it's about animals. What is an animal? Well, you can point to a fox, you can point to a lizard. There they are. We study these animals. It's at least superficially obvious what they are. So what is an idea? I remember going to seminars at Uppsala University with Karin Johansson. And I always asked this idea. And at one point, he got fed up with my incessant questioning. Oh. What is an idea? You always ask me this. And she was very irritated because obviously he didn't have an answer.
Right.
And I think no one really has.
No.
We sort of take it for granted that we know what ideas are. Yeah. But I got it into my head that I will solve this problem. I will answer the question. What is an idea? So in one way that was what I did for many years.
Yeah.
And my first hypothesis, you could say, was that ideas are artifacts, which would be in line with what we said a few minutes ago about human-made things being materially manifested ideas. So it kind of makes sense.
Yeah. So would they
you have a teacup?
Yeah.
The idea of a teacup is a teacup.
Yeah. But would they be abstract artifacts, or would it be limited?
Yeah, it would span the whole range from the most abstract to the most concrete. So an example of an abstract artifact would be the number system.
Right. Yes.
Or a mathematical proof, or something like that, or a score of music, not the played music, but the score, would be an abstract artifact, which has to be manifested in some way materially, like notes on a paper, or the mathematical scribblings on a page. You have to, even abstract ideas have to have some kind of material existence in order to be otherwise they can't be communicated and talked about. If you read a book, the content of the book is abstract, but the book isn't abstract.
And if I tell you about something, it's through the physical manifestation of it?
Well, speech is kind of interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
case.
we don't have to go into all the cases.
Let's stick with the material artifacts.
Yeah. So that was your first. That was your first proposition. Was that ideas are artifacts?
Yeah, and you have these ideas. You have the whole range then, from the most absolute to the most concrete. A very concrete artifact would be a teacup or a hammer or something.
Yeah.
But even a teacup is an idea, basically. Mm. The idea of you being able to drink tea in a certain way. So that one, I think that's in a way a valid definition, if you like. It at least it's a rather fruitful way of approaching the issues, which goes some way towards getting you into another kind of thinking. But then a few years later, I realized that that's not it, or that's not the whole thing. Mm-hmm. There's something missing. Mm. And to make a long story short, I arrived at the not idea, but the realization that an idea is a power. Mm. And then you, instead of talking about abstract or more or less abstract, more or less concrete ideas, you can talk about various intensities of ideas, various impacts of ideas. Mm. And I think that the clue that got me thinking of ideas in that way was at a seminar at the cognitive science department at Lund University. I used to hang there quite a lot earlier in my life as an academic. As a sort of aside, someone said regarding some idea that we were discussing, "That's not a very sexy idea, is it?" We need something more sexy.
Right.
Rather strange statement, isn't it? Mm. But in one sense, but in another sense, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, everybody knows what you mean.
Yeah.
It doesn't awaken anything. It doesn't stir up any emotion.
Exactly.
It doesn't have.
It doesn't motivate you.
It doesn't have any effect on you.
Yeah, it doesn't make anything happen. Mm. And in that context, it meant, of course, it doesn't give birth to any more interesting ideas. It just stays there, limpid. Mm. So that's when I started to realize, well, real ideas, what we're really talking about, is power to affect.
And it's
both effect and affect.
Right. Well, and because
or affect, I should say. I mean the verb.
Yes. So yeah. To affect as an impact, but also affect as in feeling. Feeling a connection to it, or being drawn to it, or. Yeah,
being drawn to it, being attracted to it, or repulsed by it.
Or repulsed by
matter.
It. Yes, affect.
And from an historical point of view, the motivation is crucial. What motivates people? So if you ask, how come this or that idea came to dominate there and then? This has to be what it is about. How motivating was that idea? And if you look at the idea of progress, which I've looked into quite a lot, the idea of progress, I would say that the idea of progress is what literally, powerfully motivated the creation of what we now call the modern world. Mm. What made people get up in the morning and do all this stuff to change the world so radically, to build all these modern houses, all these modern amenities, to invent and construct and spread and sell all of this? It must have been something very, very forcefully motivating. And I think it was the idea of progress, that you were actually working for things to get better. Literally better.
Yeah. And that the future holds a promise of things being able to be better.
Now the problem with us these days is that this idea of progress has lost its power. Especially among young people.
Yes. Oh, I really want to follow that line of thought, but I want to ask you for a clarification first about because that was also one of the things that I had put down as a question for you, is about, I was thinking about how ideas have power. So they have power to impact, and they can stir things in us. They can awaken desire. They have effect and affect.
May I?
But you're saying they are power.
Yes.
And
exactly.
Maybe you could say something about that distinction.
If you ask yourself, where do ideas live? If ideas are power, they are in some sense living entities.
Yes.
Living forces. Where do they live?
In the forest of thought, maybe. No, but it's a really good question, because I think that our experience of ideas is that, or for me at least, sometimes you feel like you're maybe a lot of the time we're just in the web of ideas, and we don't even think about it because we're so enmeshed in it. So that's the one experience. The other experience is you're trying to maybe create an idea, and you're kind of thinking that you're taking these different building blocks and you're trying to put them together into something. And then, an architect is designing a house or whatever. And then the other experience is that you're just walking along, and then bam, you get hit by this idea that you have no idea where it came from. And so those different experiences you could conclude different things based on those about where ideas live.
I think the general answer must be they live in us.
Yeah.
Perhaps you could even say that if you ask the question, what is a human being? What do human beings do? They harbor ideas. That's what they do. But they not only harbor them, they tend them. They grow them. They spread them. They live them. They are angry at them. They love them. They hate them. And it's all a matter of, if you watch this from the inside within yourself, it becomes all a matter of discernment, of discerning what is what. What kind of power is this idea? How am I affected by this idea? How will this idea affect this or that person or this or that group? That's what we are doing all day. Some of us consciously, most unconsciously. So I said it was a drama. So what does this drama consist in? One thesis. No, let me put it. I will. Like everything I've said now, it's kind of a simplification, but the drama is which side will win. Because I think there are sides. If you're speaking of ideas as powers that animate you, that you you yourself contribute to animating, then we're talking about living realities, our living reality. then it's obvious that different powers, that is different ideas, real ideas, not those wishy-washy sort of non-ideas that also flourish today, real ideas, which actually arouse feelings, controversies. There are sides. Some ideas are constructive, contribute to good things. Expansion, discovery, adventure, love, whatever. Other ideas are limiting, destructive. Ill-willed. So that's what I mean with the drama always going on, both between us and inside each one of us.
Well, it makes me think of a couple of different things. First of all, I mean, I think that some obvious unconstructive ideas that might, or an ill-willed idea might be the idea that a certain group of people should dominate and suppress another group of people, for example. And I think we could think of some clear examples for both of those categories, both of those sides.
But the thing is, the tricky thing, sorry for interrupting.
No, that's fine.
The tricky thing is that to understand the import of what I just said regarding ideas being powers or forces and living entities rather than thoughts, just thoughts, is that we are so used to thinking about ideas as thoughts, as statements, things that can be written down or spoken out aloud, that it's almost, it's really difficult. You have to sort of re-educate yourself. It's really difficult to talk about the drama I hinted at in terms of thoughts, in terms of explicit statements, because that's not what I'm talking about. You must not confuse statements with living ideas. And this is actually obvious if you think that explicit statements are different in different languages. But the power of an idea is independent of the language in which it is someone tries to express it. So the expression you can multiply, you can record it, you can write it down, you can demand obedience or allegiance, but the very life of the idea is its own.
Well,
which means that you can have literal expressions which sound like a certain idea. Like the power, if you only stay in your intellectual mind, if you only stay in the statements, you might come to think that the power resides in that statement.
Yes.
But it doesn't.
Right. There's a deeper...
It may have, because then the context is very important. The context of the statement. If a statement might sound very good. This is the one who says this is a good person. Maybe he or she even says it because he or she would like to be seen as a good person. But the context within which it is said or written tells you, if you have if you can discern such things, tells you that the context is not as good-natured as it makes itself out to be. That kind of discernment you can only make if you're sensitive to the energy of ideas, the energy which is not identical to the actual statements.
Yes.
It could be. Yeah. If you find the exact right word in the exact right context, then you have a sort of fusion between the power and the expression. But that's not very common that you have that.
Yeah.
So you can always be fooled if you're focusing on the mere statements.
Exactly, and I think that's why people find the act of discernment when it comes to ideas so difficult.
Yes, it is difficult.
And the reason why we're maybe also afraid to be more adventurous in the forest of thought, because things can sound very similar or be expressed very similar,
exactly,
but have a very different source. And it's also very, it's tricky to navigate between. So I think, well, how do we become better discerners in that case?
By experimenting, by trying things out, trying things on, so to speak.
Maybe also you were saying it's not just about the intellectual aspect of this, because I mean, okay, here's how I find that most people go through the process of discernment when it comes to being presented with a new idea. So what you hear is an expression of the power that is the idea. You read something that somebody wrote, and then usually at that point people will. You maybe look at who's saying it. Is this a person that I trust? Is this a person who's done good things in the past? Who else is saying the same thing as this person is saying? And then what arguments is this person using to back up their statement? And
many people don't get that far.
Yeah. Well, yeah. What arguments? And then if you're doing it consciously, what arguments are they using? And is there evidence for the statement that they're making? And then this is a very useful, obviously, way to look at the usefulness or validity of various ideas, or at least statements of ideas. But before you get to the checking who said what and whatever, often there can be you can get a feeling like you start reading something, or even just picking up a book, or you just start start reading something or hear somebody say something, and then you feel very interested and intrigued and exciting, and it's more of a bodily sensation. And it's very tricky, because this thing of intuition, where you can use, I think that's actually way more common in scholarly and intellectual circles than is often admitted, how much scientists or intellectuals use their intuition as their guide in their work, that's how they start, and then they kind of figure out the arguments and the support of it later. But it is also intuition can fail us, or it's or we're taught at least that it's very fickle, and that our feeling, it's the typical example is Hitler Hitler standing. I mean, talk about the power of, or talk about the idea power really generating emotion. And the question is, what were those people who were cheering Hitler on, or any other kind of context? What was their bodily feeling? What was their intuition? And how do we? And I think that this is something that a lot of people sort of struggle with when it comes to this process of sorting.
Well, first of all, I would say that the subject of intuition is, of course, related to what we're talking about, but I think it would it merits its own conversation. But regarding Hitler, I would say what you're getting at. There was a reaction, to simplify once again a bit, but there was a reaction after the Second World War, which meant that even within Germany, but definitely among the Allies, and there was this, I don't know if recognition is the right word, but that was this kind of observation that it seemed to many people that something that was regarded as irrational impulses had gotten the upper hand. There was a sort of lack of rationality, lack of level-headedness, and politics. It was disastrous. At least that was how many thinkers conceived of it. It was, and planners for that matter. It was disastrous to let, if you will, a misguided intuition loose in that way. Society would have to be organized on more rational principles. And that is what one has been trying to accomplish ever since, I would say. Sort of limiting the possibility of people becoming too adventurous in the forest of thought. Or in the power play of ideas. On my part, I think that this is throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And you're really, by denying something, by denying something expression, you actually build up a tension. If you're trying to be very, very rational all the time, you build up a tension because you aren't as rational. You aren't actually rational.
Right.
That's a delusion.
Yes.
But if you set that up as a kind of goal, everything should be rational. So we will never have to deal with something like Nazi Germany again. If you set that up as a kind of societal or political, economic goal, then you are denying large part of human nature, and if you're denying it, you won't be able to handle it.
Right.
Once it rises up once again.
Exactly, because I think that, related to what I was saying before, I find that we're very good at or quite good, reasonably good at the assessing ideas according to these arguments, for and against, and judging the evidence and so on. But some ideas you can't really do that. Questions that are more metaphysical in nature, or just it doesn't work that way. And what happens is that we're really bad at that, because it's just we don't know. Yeah, we don't know how to apply a discernment if it isn't this kind of like critical thinking that you learned in school. If it's not checking the sources of the and checking the statistics of the argument.
I will probably have to say this as well. Then I'm definitely not criticizing critical thinking.
No, of course not.
I think we have. There's too little of that.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
I don't think you learn it in school.
Okay.
At all.
Yeah.
I think you learn some kind of pretend critical thinking in school. You don't really learn critical thinking. That I know as a university teacher. As a former university teacher, I came up against this all the time. That realization that students couldn't really think critically. It's not very easy to do.
No, it's not.
And in one sense, I would even say that a certain degree of ability to think critically is necessary for the kind of discernment I'm talking about. Because even though I say that ideas are powers, living entities, there's always an intellectual aspect to any idea. And if you cannot both discern the power and think critically about the intellectual aspect, you're lost either way. So you have to combine those two.
That's a very good distinction. That's very useful. I think that thinking of ideas as powers, and also that would you say that they interplay in this drama?
Oh yes, they absolutely. But usually not on their own, but through us, by means of us.
Yes. If we think about ideas in that way, which I think is pretty different than how most people think of it, what does that mean for how we change the way we engage with ideas?
I don't know. I don't know in the sense that I have no kind of what you're asking is a kind of proposition. How give me a manual.
Tell us what to do, please.
Yeah, and that's always, to me, always a misguided question. Well, I think I think most of all this change of perspective is useful in order to sort of realign your being in a more realistic direction. I think you will find, if you manage to do this realignment, that the way you will see the world, the way you will experience your relationships, the way you will be able to choose what you shall do in various situations will improve, because you will be relating to relating to situations in a way which is much more in accord with what actually happens. And I deliberately use the word situations to emphasize that this isn't about how to think correctly or follow this or that manual. It's about being present in actual situations and having the resources within yourself to judge, or rather discern what is going on. And everything we ever experience are situations. We never experience anything else than situations in which we are present. Whether we are alone sitting reading a book or something, or whether we are at a conference, or if we are just among friends or having a beer or whatever, we are always in situations. And every actual situation is embedded in this play of forces, powers. And the statements, what is said, what is written, what is explicit, is just one ingredient. Which we have become much too fixated upon in modern Western society. There's this hyper-intellectuality which we will have to deal with somehow. It's leading us astray, not to a good place.
Do you want to say something more about that? What do you mean?
I could say more about that. I don't think there's a real end to this conversation.
No, I don't think so either. I'm not sure if this is necessary,
but maybe you have something you would just like to bring up. I'm happy with that.
I mean, I feel the need to bring up something that I think an issue that I think some people might take with the conversation as we've been having it so far, where we're speaking about the world of ideas, so to speak, and ideas as entities and powers. And I think that, one of the common diagnoses that people make of, what is our problem, so to speak. Yeah. What is one of our big problems in the modern world is that we have come to have a very dualistic understanding of the world. That the mind and the body are separate, and people often blame Descartes for this, that the mind and body are separate, and then we have a tendency also to make the mind the more useful, beautiful, holy, rational, divine, insert whatever word you want, part, and that's the eternal, and that's what we should be striving for, and everything else is it's kind of this idea that your body is just there as a useful way to carry your brain around. And I think that in practice this is how a lot of people live their lives in the modern world. And then also, since humans in general seem to be the ones engaged mostly in this generating ideas and harboring ideas, etc., then it also leads to this idea of human exceptionalism, which is also posited as one of our the causes of our demise and why we destroy the rest of nature so easily. So I think, could you say something sure. About that?
Regarding dualism, the view I've been trying to express is radically non-dualistic. If you're speaking of powers and energies and forces, there's no real distinction between thinking, feeling, bodily sensations, outside, inside. That's not the kind of distinction that is operative. You will have to make quite different kinds of distinctions. So it's there's no just take as a starting point, if you want to think more about this, take as a starting point what we said, what I said and you yourself said about the connection between ideas and created things in our artificial environment. That's how I originally in the early 80s or something realized why dualism must of necessity be a false, or rather the dichotomy between mind and matter must necessarily be a false, metaphysically false, philosophically false, realistically false. Because if you have first an idea, which sort of by definition is within one or a few human beings, and then this idea is realized in some item, say a book or a building or whatever, a spoon. What happened? How did that come about?
Right.
If I hold up this book and say this thing here is full of ideas, what's the difference between the ideas in the book and the ideas in the mind of the author who wrote it? That's the ideas in the book and the ideas in the mind of the author exist in different modes. But you can't say that's there really any significant difference. And how did the ideas get out in the first place? And when I read the book, how the hell do they get in? So even if you don't understand even if you can't answer those questions, it's obvious that there is something going on here which totally belies the distinction between inner and outer. Right? So everything I've been saying is radically non-dualistic in that sense. Regarding human exceptionalism, I think humans. I am a sort of human exceptionalist. Because human beings are the only kind of creature which have these troubles we're having sitting here now. Talking about. I don't see any other creature having that kind of trouble. So I think human beings are by definition, by the very fact of being human beings, troubled creatures. That's what human life is about, being troubled. And we're very good at troubling ourselves. And that's what everything human life is about. Learning from the troubles, getting more aware, becoming more aware.
Yeah, and that the crucial distinction there is between the human exceptionalism, which says that since we're thinking creatures, then other troubled creatures, then other creatures and the rest of nature doesn't matter. And of course, that's kind of a conclusion which is doesn't need to be drawn at all.
As a human ecologist, I know exactly where those kinds of ideas come from. Those kinds of expressions of ideas come from. And I won't deny that there is a kind of complex but still tradition in Western philosophy, and especially modern Western thinking from the 17th century onwards, which says that since, if you put it in Christian terms, which is the origin really, sort of, I would say it's a misinterpretation, but still, an interpretation of the book of Genesis in the Old Testament, which says that since man was set to rule over the other animals, man has the right, or at least has the right to do whatever he pleases for what he deems to be his own good. That's one kind of human exceptionalism, of course, not the one I'm arguing for. I also think it's a misinterpretation of what it says in Genesis. Because just because you are a different kind of creature different from the other creatures, this makes it possible for you to do things that the other creatures can't do. This doesn't mean that you have to do those things. What we're talking about here is a kind of freedom of action. And freedom of action is by definition meaningless if you can't go wrong. If you can't do evil things. You could even say that the very concept of good is meaningless without concept of evil. So if you're not confronted with evil, you won't being aware, won't even be able to be aware of what is good. And that's also what I mean by us human beings being troubled creatures. Always being aware of these contrasts. And I think we should be happy about that, because it's It's a possibility for each one of us to become more aware and learn and develop.
At the end of our conversation, I started wondering if perhaps it would be better to call the podcast a forest garden of thought. Because really we're not passive bystanders or observers, but an active part of the forest, and participating in its unfolding with our attention or disinterest, our intention, our habits and desires, etc. And on our Patreon page, you'll find the last 20-25 minutes of the conversation between Per and myself, where we talk about this forest garden of thought and also discuss whether or not nature cares about what we humans do. So that's on our Patreon page, patreon.com/forestofthought. As always, you'll find further resources in the show notes. I want to thank Emma and Felicia for help with this episode. Of course, thanks to Christian Sten at stoneproduction.no for our theme music. And thank you so much for listening. It wouldn't be very fun without you. And you can always find Forest of Thought on Instagram, Facebook, or our website, forestofthought.com. Take care.